Tonight we stand among mountains that touch the sky. You can feel the cold air thin against your lungs, sharp and metallic, like breathing through silver. Around you, the Andes rise in serrated ranks, stone waves frozen mid-crash. Somewhere far below, a river shivers its way through a canyon that looks too deep to measure. And perched on a ledge, impossibly balanced between cloud and cliff, is a wall, just one wall, built so straight, so seamless, you can't help leaning closer to check if the world has glitched. You probably won't survive this, you know. The altitude alone is rude. Your pulse ticks like a tiny drum, and your modern sneakers suddenly feel like a cosmic joke next to centuries-old engineering. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step closer to that wall, and the world rearranges itself. The stones are massive, some the size of cars, others like small houses, but they lock together like puzzle pieces. No mortar, no glue, just gravity and patience. You run a fingertip along a join and feel almost nothing, just the ghost of a line so fine it might have been drawn with a whisper. Welcome to Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire, the land of 4 quarters bound by straight lines. Here, every road, temple, and terrace seems drawn with a cosmic ruler. Historians still argue whether that obsession with order came from the heavens or from the human hunger to tame chaos. Either way, you're standing in a civilization that decided precision was a form of worship. The air smells faintly of dust and burnt sunlight. Far off, a condor circles lazily, tracing an invisible geometry above you. The Inca would have noticed that curve, how it met the angle of the cliffs, how the sun hit the stones at precisely the right hour to cast a perfect shadow. They were engineers, yes, but also dreamers with compasses in their souls. A guide in a faded hat passes by, muttering about ashlar masonry and seismic resistance. You nod as if you understand, but you're mostly thinking, how? No cranes, no iron tools, no wheels, and yet they built cities that have outlasted empires. Some archaeologists believe they softened rock with plant acids. Others think they just carved for decades until perfection emerged. Historians still argue whether it was technique or pure, stubborn artistry. Either way, it worked. The stones of Sacsayhuaman have endured earthquakes that flattened everything else. You imagine the builders, thousands of workers hauling blocks up steep paths, guided by master masons who could sight a straight line through mountain fog. One wrong move, and the block could tumble, crushing anything below. And yet the lines hold. They always hold. There's a quiet music in that kind of certainty, a rhythm built from hammer, chisel, and breath. At sunset, the mountains glow red and gold. The stones catch the light like they're alive. Somewhere nearby, someone strikes a conch shell horn, and the note echoes down the valley in perfect alignment with the fading sun. That's not an accident. The Inca tracked the solstices and equinoxes, marking each with temples that faced precisely where the first light would strike. The empire ran not just on politics or war, but on geometry. And still, there's something strangely human in it. You find yourself tracing patterns on the stone with your eyes, seeing faces, birds, rivers. Maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe every perfect angle was also a kind of prayer. A breeze stirs, carrying the smell of burning wood from some distant village. For a moment, you can almost hear laughter, hammers, the thud of ropes tightening around another giant stone. A llama bleats somewhere behind you, its voice absurdly modern, like a tired car horn. You smile. Even perfection has livestock. There's a fringe theory, don't laugh, that the Incas had an early understanding of magnetism, that they used lodestones to sense true north. No proof, just whispers. Still, you can't shake the feeling that they knew something the rest of us forgot. Every path you see ahead of you seems too straight, too sure, as if the world itself conspired to help them draw it. Night settles in soft and slow. The stars come out, vast and unapologetic. The Milky Way arches over the mountains like spilled salt, and you remember reading that the Inca saw constellations not as clusters of stars, but as dark shapes, the spaces between light. Even their cosmos was defined by what wasn't there, by invisible lines connecting absence to meaning. You sit down on a cool rock and watch the first torch flicker to life in the valley. The sound of running water drifts upward, steady as breathing. Somewhere, maybe in another life, you'd be part of a work crew setting a new foundation stone, aligning it with the stars, measuring its angle by moonlight. Here, the straight line isn't just a tool, it's a promise, a way of saying the world can be understood. The night deepens. You can feel the earth beneath you humming faintly, as if the stones themselves remember the hands that shaped them. The hum is low, patient, eternal. You lean back, close your eyes, and for a moment the lines stretch out forever. Roads, walls, rivers, stars, all drawn toward some unseen horizon where everything finally fits. You wake before dawn, or maybe you never really slept. The air is cold enough to sting, and the horizon glows a bruised violet. The mountains look softer now, wrapped in low clouds, like they're pretending to be kind. Down in the valley, a ribbon of road gleams faintly in the morning light, an unbroken line cutting through ridges and ravines. You recognize it immediately, the Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca road. You start walking. The path is older than almost anything else still standing on this continent. It once stretched for nearly 25,000 miles, enough to circle the earth and still have some leftover for a scenic route. Stone paved, perfectly graded, zigzagging through deserts, jungles, glacier. It connected 4 vast regions, from Quito in modern Ecuador all the way to Santiago in Chile, and every village, temple, and fortress in between. The Incas called their empire Tawantinsuyu, meaning the 4 quarters together. You could say this road was the spine that held those quarters upright. Your shoes crunch against stone polished smooth by centuries of footsteps, messengers, soldiers, pilgrims, llamas loaded with maize and copper and coca leaves. The Inca runners, the Chasquis, would sprint along these routes carrying knotted strings of information called quipus, and their endurance makes you feel deeply unfit. Some legends say they could deliver fresh fish from the Pacific to Cusco, over hundreds of miles, before it spoiled. Historians still argue whether they ran relay style or individually. Either way, they were the first express mail service, long before stamps and bureaucracy. The path narrows, threading between cliffs. You notice how each step feels deliberate, even meditative. The stones fit together like a language your feet can almost read. Straight lines, sure, but never careless ones. The Inca engineers adjusted every angle to the terrain, making the road look impossibly direct even as it wove through chaos. It's like the world bent politely to accommodate their geometry. A shepherd waves from the distance, guiding a pack of alpacas along a parallel trail. Their bells tinkle softly, a sound that could be 1,000 years old. You nod in return and keep walking. The path rises in slow, even switchbacks, and you realize that no section feels random, every incline measured for breath, every curve for visibility. This wasn't just a road, it was a nervous system. You pause at a tambo, a roadside rest station now mostly in ruins. Once, these were supply depots and inns for the travelers of empire, stocked with food, tools, and, probably, gossip. A few crumbled walls remain, their corners suspiciously perfect despite centuries of wind. You imagine the scene, Chasquis trading news about rebellions, priests muttering over maps of stars, a cook ladling out quinoa stew. You, sitting cross-legged with sore feet, eavesdropping and pretending you belong. A stray dog trots by, tail curled, clearly unimpressed with your reverie. It sniffs a rock, decides against it, and trots on, perhaps toward a more historically significant rock. You grin. Even the animals follow the same routes their ancestors did. The road keeps calling you forward. Somewhere above, on a ridge, stand the faint outlines of ancient watchtowers. From there, sentinels could signal with mirrors or smoke, flashes of light jumping across valleys faster than any horse. A pre-electric internet of sorts. One misaligned signal, though, and confusion could ripple through the empire. Precision mattered. The straight line wasn't just aesthetic, it was communication, the lifeline of empire. You take a sip from your water bottle and glance around. The air is thin and tastes faintly metallic, but somehow clean. Down below, terraces ripple across the mountainside, like green fingerprints pressed into stone. The Incas carved order into the landscape itself. Flat plains where there should be cliffs, grids where there should be wildness. Historians still argue whether their terraces were mostly agricultural innovation or sacred architecture. Probably both. For the Inca, engineering and spirituality were never at odds. At a bend in the path, you notice something strange, a section where the road runs arrow straight toward the horizon, seemingly through solid rock. You crouch, tracing the groove of old wheel ruts, though, of course, there were no wheels here. The Inca moved everything by hand and by foot. Yet they built roads smooth enough that later conquerors could ride their horses without dismounting. You have to admit, that's an impressive revenge from beyond the grave move. The sun climbs higher, washing the peaks in gold. You're sweating now, but you don't mind. The rhythm of walking feels like time travel, each step erasing centuries of noise. You can almost see the Inca engineers, surveyors with ropes and weighted cords, measuring gradients, checking shadows, aligning the way forward with almost religious care. They didn't just build for convenience, they built for eternity. A fringe theory you once read drifts into mind, that the Qhapaq Ñan wasn't purely functional but served as a ritual map, a kind of terrestrial reflection of celestial patterns. The roads linked not only cities but sacred mountains and shrines, tracing the empire's cosmic alignment on Earth. No proof, of course. But standing here, with the mountains leaning in like silent judges, you can almost believe it. As you descend toward a small valley, the road widens again. A trickle of water runs in a stone channel beside you, another piece of ancient infrastructure still doing its job. You crouch and touch it. Cold, pure, endlessly moving forward. Like the road itself. Then you spot something glinting in the dust, a tiny bronze chisel, maybe modern, maybe ancient. You pick it up and turn it in your fingers. For a moment, it's easy to imagine an Inca stonemason kneeling here centuries ago, tapping the earth in rhythm with your heartbeat. You smile and place the chisel back where you found it. The straight line continues, unbroken. By midday, you reach a plateau. The road vanishes into the shimmering horizon, but you can still sense it, its logic, its pull. The Incas didn't just connect places, they connected intentions. They built trust into terrain, one flat stone at a time. A buzzard wheels overhead. Your breath slows. The Andes hum beneath your boots. And you realize that somewhere inside you, a compass needle has quietly turned to face whatever lies ahead. The road narrows again as you climb into thinner air, and the silence changes texture. It's no longer empty, it feels listening. You pause, unsure whether to whisper or shout. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, the empire's accountants and storytellers once worked their miracles with nothing but string. The Inca called them Qhapaq Ñan, and you're about to meet their ghostly precision. You reach a plateau where a low stone hut squats beneath the shadow of a tall standing rock. A few tufts of yellow grass rattle in the wind. Inside, the air smells of old dust and wool. You imagine rows of people sitting cross-legged on mats, their fingers moving quickly over bundles of colored cords. To the untrained eye, it's just a tangle, but to them, it's pure order. The quipu, a system of knotted strings used to record everything from harvests to taxes, births, deaths, even astronomical events. It's the Inca spreadsheet, made tactile. You run your hand along a replica hanging on the wall. The fibers feel soft but deliberate, alpaca or cotton, dyed in earthy hues. Each knot has meaning. A single loop might signify hundreds, a twist the direction of trade, a color the category of goods. The complexity makes your brain feel like a tangled phone charger. Historians still argue whether quipus encoded language itself or merely numbers. Were they data ledgers or actual sentences? No one knows for sure. You picture a quipu maker bent over his work, lips moving silently as he checks the pattern. The empire stretched thousands of miles, yet the message system remained nearly flawless. Runners carried quipus along the Qhapaq Ñan, swapping them at way stations, ensuring information flowed faster than armies could march. In a way, this was the Inca internet, fast, decentralized, utterly dependable until someone forgot which knot meant urgent. A shaft of light cuts across the hut, landing on a bundle of knotted cords lying forgotten on a low shelf. You wonder what story those threads once held. A census? A love letter? A warning? Maybe all of the above. It's the kind of mystery that keeps archaeologists awake at night. You step back outside and squint at the horizon. Straight lines again, paths, terraces, irrigation channels, all radiating outward like the cords of an enormous quipu stretched across the empire. Suddenly, it clicks. Maybe the Inca weren't obsessed with straightness for aesthetic reasons at all. Maybe the entire empire was one massive recording system, each road a data string, each junction a knot. A shepherd trudges past with a staff and a skeptical expression, as if reading your thoughts. Counting, he says, tapping his stick against the ground. Everything is counting. You smile. Even now, the Andes keep their own ledgers, of wind, of footsteps, of time. You keep walking, your pace syncing unconsciously with your breath. The path bends along a cliff edge, opening onto a view so wide it makes your knees weak. Valleys, terraces, rivers, the whole world seems organized, disciplined. Somewhere far below, a flock of white birds traces a line through the air, as if rehearsing the same geometry the masons and quipu masters once worshipped. You find a large flat rock and sit, pulling a notebook from your bag. You try sketching the view, the neat terraces, the meandering stream, the tight seams of the old road. But your pencil rebels, veering slightly, imperfectly human. You laugh softly. Maybe the Inca engineers would have frowned at your crooked horizon. Or maybe they'd nod, approving the effort to make sense of the impossible. According to one Spanish chronicler, whose name you probably couldn't pronounce even with subtitles, the Inca could estimate population size and resource yield across their empire without written language, using quipus alone. Entire armies supplied, taxes collected, harvests stored, all through knots and intuition. French historians even claim they used binary-style coding long before computers. No proof, of course, but it makes you want to high-five a llama. The sun is climbing, and with it, the wind. It whistles through the valleys, tugging at your hair like it's trying to braid it into its own message. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The wind itself sounds patterned, pulsing, repeating, like Morse code. Maybe that's the trick. Once you learn to read the world in lines and loops, everything starts talking. A rustle behind you. A young local guide approaches, hands in pockets. "You like the quipus?" he asks. You nod. "Hard to believe they could remember so much," you say. He smiles. "Not remember. Feel." You don't memorize knots, you feel what they say. You think about that as you stand and start walking again. Maybe the empire's greatest strength wasn't its organization but its empathy, a way of sensing structure beneath chaos. Straight lines weren't just about control, they were a kind of compassion for the messy world, a promise to understand it. The path leads downward through a patch of tall grasses, and each blade seems to point in the same direction. Somewhere ahead, faint but insistent, you can hear running water. Always the same, water and stone, rhythm and order. The Incas had a knack for listening to the land instead of conquering it. Maybe that's why their lines still hum centuries later. At the edge of the slope, you find a carved stone marker, a milestone, smooth and symmetrical. You brush away dust and see faint carvings, zigzag patterns, circles, and what looks suspiciously like a long, straight groove. It's easy to imagine an Inca surveyor standing here, squinting down the line to the next marker miles away, ensuring the road's perfect alignment. Almost perfect, you murmur. And somewhere deep beneath your feet, the earth itself seems to whisper back, good enough. You laugh quietly. The Andes have always had a sense of humor about human perfectionism. Maybe that's why they let the Inca build straight lines across their crooked spines in the first place. You shoulder your pack and start downhill, tracing the invisible quipu of the empire. The path glows faintly in the slanting sun, and for a heartbeat, you feel connected to every hand that ever tied a knot in a cord, every step that ever pressed into this stone. Data, devotion, destiny, all running in the same direction. The road begins to level out, and with the gentler grade comes a strange kind of peace. The wind softens, the air grows warmer, and you start noticing details again, a pattern of stones that makes a perfect right angle, the way the mountain ridges frame the morning light as though the whole world were a calendar. You realize you're standing inside geometry, architecture and astronomy stitched together. You don't need a ruler, the horizon does it for you. You come to a cluster of ruins perched on a hill. The locals call it an old observatory, though no telescopes ever stood here, just eyes, memory, and a cosmic sense of timing. The Inca built places like this all across their empire, aligned so precisely with the heavens that they could track solstices, equinoxes, and even the slow breathing of the moon. Historians still argue whether these were scientific instruments or sacred temples. You're thinking it was probably both. When your calendar also predicts the gods' moods, why choose one? You step between two tall stones, gateposts, maybe, and sunlight slices through perfectly, landing on a smaller carved stone in the center. The beam hits at such an exact angle that you almost expect it to click, like turning on an ancient switch. They built this for the solstice, says your guide softly, emerging from behind a wall. You glance at him, half expecting him to be joking, but his expression is reverent. Once a year, the sun stands still right here. The whole empire used this to know when to plant. It hits you then, the Inca didn't just draw straight lines across Earth, they extended them into the sky. Their cities and roads weren't random, they followed the alignments of stars and sacred mountains, called apis. Every horizon line meant something. Every shadow told time. You crouch near the center stone, tracing its edge with your fingertip. The surface is smooth but scarred, as if centuries of light had worn it down. The air smells faintly of dry moss and ozone. Somewhere below, a stream chatters in the valley, its voice echoing up the slope like laughter. You think of how different this is from the usual image of ancient science. There are no scrolls or equations here, just rocks and patience. Yet somehow, these people measured the tilt of the planet with accuracy that would impress a modern surveyor. Fringe theorists claim the Inca used long sightlines across mountain peaks to triangulate distances, effectively turning the Andes into one enormous observatory. Maybe. Or maybe they just paid really close attention, generation after generation, until the landscape itself became a teacher. A condor glides overhead, its wings cutting a lazy figure eight in the air. You can't help noticing how even its flight seems to follow some invisible rule, looping neatly along the ridges. The Inca would have seen omens in that, geometry as divinity, wings tracing equations of fate. You stand and stretch, the sun now high enough to warm your face. The guide points to another structure farther uphill. That's the Intihuatana, he says, and the word rolls from his tongue like a spell. You climb toward it, boots crunching gravel, and soon you're looking at one of those carved stones that look like half-finished sculptures. Intihuatana means the hitching post of the sun. At certain times of the year, its shadows vanish entirely, as though the sun were tied to the rock by invisible rope. Historians still argue whether it was an astronomical device or a spiritual anchor to keep the seasons from drifting away. You lay your palm flat against the stone. It's warm, humming faintly beneath your hand, though maybe that's just your imagination. You whisper, "So you were their calendar." The stone, of course, says nothing. But you swear it approves. Nearby, terraces ripple down the hillside in clean, symmetrical steps. You can almost hear the echoes of farmers planting in rhythm with the sun's path. To them, math wasn't an abstract game, it was survival, faith, choreography. The empire grew because they understood the geometry of the earth better than anyone else dared to. You take a deep breath and catch a scent of dust mixed with blooming herbs. The combination feels ancient and oddly comforting. You know, your guide says, some people think they built these temples as maps of the sky. The stars above, the stones below, mirrors. He shrugs. Maybe they didn't just watch the heavens. Maybe they invited them. You grin. That's poetic. He grins back. It's the altitude. You laugh, but you can't shake the feeling that he's right. Standing here, the air humming between stone and sunlight, you sense an invisible grid connecting everything, sky to rock, past to future, line to line. The precision doesn't feel cold or mechanical. It feels intimate, like the universe leaning close to whisper its coordinates. You wander toward a wall decorated with faint carvings, spirals, intersecting lines, what might be constellations. One looks suspiciously like a llama, another could be the Milky Way. You remember reading that the Inca saw constellations not as stars but as dark patches in the galaxy, cosmic shadows rather than dots of light. Even in astronomy, they read the negative space, the hidden structure beneath the visible. That's some next-level design philosophy. A sudden gust sweeps through, flapping your jacket like a banner. The sun shifts, and the shadow from the tall gateposts creeps across the stone marker again. It's so precise it could time your heartbeat. You imagine a priest standing here 500 years ago, raising his hands as the shadow touched the stone, signaling that the new season had begun. The crowd below would cheer, drums would thunder, and the empire would pivot, literally, on a single line of light. Somewhere nearby, a hawk cries. The sound slices through the thin air, sharp and solitary. You look up, following the bird's arc as it glides along the same invisible geometry that seems to guide everything here. You smile. Even the wildlife respects straight lines. The sun burns higher, and the landscape begins to shimmer. The guide has already wandered ahead, leaving you alone amid the stones. You trace one last line of shadow with your fingertip, committing it to memory, the straightest thing in a world of shifting clouds. And as you turn to leave, you notice the faintest groove in the earth leading downhill, a path so subtle it could vanish with one heavy rain. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's perfectly straight, perfectly deliberate, perfectly Inca. You follow it without thinking. You follow the faint line downhill until it becomes unmistakably deliberate, A ledge of massive stones, each one carved to fit the next as if they'd been poured like wax and cooled together. The air here feels heavier, full of the scent of wet granite and lichen. The path curves toward a vast wall, gleaming faintly in the filtered light. Up close, you can see it isn't just a wall, it's a declaration. This is where the Inca engineers stopped whispering and started showing off. The blocks rise in layers like steps for giants, each stone a puzzle piece carved to interlock with those around it in ways your geometry teacher never covered. You reach out to touch one, and the surface is silky smooth, edges so tight you could mistake them for machine-cut seams. No mortar. No visible chisel marks. Just intention, precision, and back-breaking patience. This is ashlar masonry, you murmur, trying out the phrase like it'll make you sound knowledgeable. In truth, it's witchcraft. Historians still argue whether the Inca used bronze tools, pounding stones, or something entirely lost to time. The Spanish conquistadors marveled at it, too, and then tried to copy it, with notably less success. There's a rumor that when they asked the local masons how they shaped the stones so perfectly, the workers just smiled and said, "We talked to them." You tilt your head, studying the joins. They curve, not straight like bricks, but fluid, organic. Some stones have 12, 14, even 24 sides, fitting together in patterns that seem impossible to plan. You can't help but laugh softly. Straight lines? Sure. But the Inca loved them so much they bent them into curves that still obeyed the same precision. A guide back in Cusco once told you that the builders started with rough shapes, then rubbed the stones against each other until both matched perfectly. Imagine sanding down two refrigerators until they become soulmates. Fringe theories, of course, suggest sonic levitation or heat-softened granite. Ancient laser enthusiasts love that one, but there's no evidence. Just awe. Pure, baffled awe. You crouch to study one joint where two massive blocks meet. The seam zigzags slightly, a deliberate pattern. Seismic resistance, you whisper. The Incas knew earthquakes like city dwellers know traffic jams. Their walls flexed when the earth shook, absorbing motion instead of fighting it. Meanwhile, colonial cathedrals built on top of Inca foundations crumbled like stale cookies. There's poetic justice in that. You lean back and squint along the wall's face. The alignment is flawless. You could shoot a laser beam along it and not miss by a millimeter. The wall seems alive in its perfection, like it's waiting to correct your posture. You take a deep breath and realize you've been holding your shoulders stiff, unconsciously mimicking the straightness. The wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of coca leaves and earth. You glance around and spot a few local kids playing with pebbles near the base of the wall, stacking them into tiny versions of the great stones. One of them laughs when his little tower collapses, and the sound echoes up the masonry, soft but resonant. Maybe that's how it started centuries ago, play evolving into precision. A small carving catches your eye, a faint snake, its body curling through the joints of the stones. In Inca symbolism, the snake represented the underworld and knowledge, fitting for a people who built wisdom right into the earth. Above, carved barely perceptibly, are the wings of a condor. The Inca liked to build in triptychs, the snake for the underworld, the puma for the world of the living, and the condor for the heavens. Every wall, every temple, was part of that layered cosmology. You trace the carving's line and realize, it's perfectly straight. Of course it is. You stand and walk along the wall's length. Every few steps, you find something new. A hollowed niche where offerings might have been placed, a faint line carved into the foundation, a deliberate slope that channels rainwater away. Nothing wasted, nothing random. Even erosion seems to have respected their planning. A little voice in your head, the modern one that loves to overanalyze everything, starts whispering about survey tools and architectural blueprints. But then another part of you, The half that's gone quiet under this altitude and stillness, murmurs back, they didn't need drawings. They had memory. Generations of builders passing down techniques through apprenticeships so long they became instinct. Knowledge, not written, but embodied. You rest your palm against a stone the size of a refrigerator. It's cool and faintly damp. For a moment, you can almost hear the echoes of chisels and shouted commands, the rhythmic thud of hammerstones. A gust of wind moans through the valley, and the wall seems to hum in response. You imagine standing here 500 years ago, when the structure was new, the stones gleaming white under a sky full of condors. Historians still argue whether the Incas designed all this for beauty or survival, you say aloud. Maybe both. The wall doesn't answer, but you swear it flexes slightly in the wind, just a tiny give, like it's breathing. You step back, trying to take in the whole thing at once, and realize how the structure mirrors the mountain behind it. The slopes, the contours, the rhythm, it's like the engineers sculpted nature's own geometry into permanence. They didn't fight the mountain, they copied it. Straight lines, yes, but only those the land itself permitted. A small rock dislodges near your foot and rolls down a terrace, landing beside a clump of moss. You smile. Even the accidents here seem well planned. As the sun dips lower, the stones turn golden, the shadows deepening into perfect right angles. You feel the same strange peace you felt at the start of this journey, the kind that comes from seeing something that simply works. No chaos, no compromise, just lines meeting where they should. You wish you could bring one of these masons into your modern world, hand them a smartphone, and watch them silently judge your crooked IKEA furniture. The air grows cooler. You take one last look at the wall, its impossible seams, its silent grace, and begin to walk away. Behind you, the mountain catches the last of the sunlight, and for an instant, wall and peak glow together, indistinguishable. You realize then, the Inca didn't build against nature. They built with it. Every line they drew was a conversation with the earth, and the earth, for reasons still beyond us, listened. The mountain path narrows and the air dries out, sharpening into the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. You've left the green terraces behind, trading the scent of wet stone for the dusty perfume of the desert. The sun flattens everything into silhouettes, black hills, silver sand, a horizon drawn with a ruler. You blink, and for a second you think you see them, faint white lines, miles long, slicing across the plain. You're no longer in the empire's high spine, you're in the Nazca Desert, far south, where straightness takes on an entirely new kind of obsession. The lines stretch across the landscape like the world's biggest notebook doodles. Geometric figures, spirals, trapezoids, and shapes of animals, hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, etched into the earth so huge you can't really see them unless you're flying above. Which, of course, the Nazca people couldn't. At least, as far as we know. You walk along one of the shallower grooves, careful not to disturb it. The line is only a few inches deep, carved by removing the darker surface stones to reveal pale sand underneath. Simple enough, yet it survived 2,000 years of wind. The desert barely rains, barely breathes, and that silence has preserved these lines like an open-air museum. Historians still argue whether these geoglyphs were built by the Nazca people long before the Incas or whether the Inca later expanded upon them. Some say the Inca adopted the idea, the art of drawing on the world itself, as part of their own geometric faith. Whatever the lineage, you can feel the same spirit here, the urge to align, to measure, to make sense of space. The sun burns overhead, and the horizon shimmers like liquid metal. You shield your eyes and imagine what it must have looked like from the hills. Workers moving slowly, dragging wooden stakes, measuring by footsteps, checking the angles against the rising sun. No drones, no aerial view. just trust in mathematics and patience that makes modern people look allergic to time. There's an old joke among archaeologists that the Nazca must have had ancient hot air balloons to check their work. Some even tried to prove it, recreating balloons out of reeds and llama fat as fuel. One of them actually got off the ground for a few glorious minutes before crash landing in the sand. You picture that scene and snort softly. Humanity's been obsessed with checking its own homework for centuries. You stop near the faint outline of the Nazca hummingbird, wings spread, beak stretching like a compass needle across hundreds of feet. The line is so straight it's dizzying. You walk along the wing, counting your steps, and realize that even from ground level, the path feels purposeful. Maybe you didn't need to see the whole image to feel its perfection. Maybe that's the point. A whisper of wind brushes against your cheek, bringing with it the dry tang of minerals and sunburnt air. The desert feels alive in a slow, mathematical way, like it's waiting for the next equation. You remember reading that some lines align with solstices and stars, others with underground water channels. Fringe theories get wilder: alien runways, coded messages for gods, prehistoric landing strips. You chuckle. If aliens built this, you say aloud, they had fantastic project managers. Still, there's something undeniably transcendent about standing here, caught between logic and myth. The Incas, when they later spread their empire this far south, must have looked upon these lines and felt kinship. Their roads, temples, and aqueducts shared the same reverence for direction, the same hunger for order in chaos. You glance down and notice tiny pebbles glinting underfoot. The stones are darker than the sand beneath them, oxidized over centuries. You pick one up, roll it between your fingers, then drop it gently back in place. Each pebble here is part of a larger picture, a piece of cosmic handwriting. As you walk farther, you spot a low hill dotted with modern markers and flags. Tourists used to climb it to get a better view before drones took over the job. You climb anyway. The wind tugs at your jacket, and by the time you reach the top, you can see the faint ghost of lines stretching across the valley floor like the strings of a forgotten instrument. Straight, deliberate, infinite. You sit down, the sand still warm from the sun, and let your mind wander. The Nazca drew with patience, the Incas built with precision. Both carved stories into landscapes where nature seemed immovable. Maybe the line itself was the prayer, a way of asking the world to stay predictable, to stop shifting underfoot. The light begins to soften, and the lines blur into the amber haze. A shadow of a vulture drifts across the plain, gliding silently in the thermal currents. You track it until it disappears into the sun's afterglow. The desert exhales. You close your eyes and imagine standing here centuries ago, watching priests trace the first outlines with ropes and wooden pegs, chanting to the sky. Maybe they believed the gods could see what they couldn't, that perfection existed somewhere just above, visible only from beyond the human vantage. You find that strangely comforting. We still do the same thing, only now we call it Google Earth. A faint hum interrupts your thoughts, a single prop plane, circling far above. You squint and catch its glinting wings, and for a moment, you see the full hummingbird shape beneath it. Perfect symmetry from chaos. You can't help smiling. After all this time, the lines still work. They still tell their story, though no one fully agrees what that story is. You dust the sand off your hands and start back toward the ridge. The air cools quickly as the sun dips, and shadows sharpen the patterns in the earth. Straight lines glowing faintly in twilight, an empire's dream still visible long after its architects turned to dust. At the crest, you pause and glance back one last time. The lines stretch beyond sight, vanishing into distance and legend. Somewhere up there in the stars, perhaps, the shapes still align with their celestial twins. Maybe that's what the Inca inherited most of all. the faith that geometry could bridge heaven and earth. You breathe deep, tasting iron and wind, and whisper to the horizon, "You still draw well." You descend from the dry Nazca plains into a world alive again, where air carries water and every stone seems to sweat under the jungle heat. The Inca roads, those razor-straight arteries of empire, do not end at the desert's edge. They slice straight into cloud forest, threading the impossible. The jungle presses close, leaves as big as shields, the air humming with insects that sound suspiciously like malfunctioning drones. Your skin feels sticky with the sweetness of rotten life, and ahead, the path gleams with wet stones set so level it looks like they were installed yesterday. You're walking the Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca road. 16,000 miles of it once crossed mountains, deserts, and valleys, all radiating outward from Cusco, the heart of the empire. The Romans built straight roads too, but the Incas did it with mountains in the way, which feels a bit like trying to lay a marble countertop across a sleeping dragon. Still, the line never faltered. The road held its direction with the stubborn grace of a promise. Your boots splash through a puddle, and you catch the faint glint of mica in the stones. Historians still argue whether that shimmer was aesthetic or functional, light markers for travelers at dusk. The Inca were practical dreamers. After all, everything they built had two meanings. You stop to watch a train of llamas pick their way up the slope. They moved delicately, hooves clicking softly on wet rock, guided by a heider with a face carved by weather and patience. The animal's burden, sacks of potatoes, perhaps, or woven cloth, sways in rhythm. You realize this road still works. Half a millennium later, people are still walking it, still trusting its lines. Somewhere above the canopy, a ridge cuts across the sky, and your guide, if you can call the man ahead with the bright red poncho a guide, points toward it. "That's the old signal line," he says, voice calm as mist. You follow his gaze and spot a series of hilltop towers. The Incas used these to send messages, smoke by day, fire by night, across hundreds of miles. A kind of optical telegraph, long before Morse. And, naturally, the towers were aligned in perfect straight sight lines. You imagine the light racing through night after night, leaping across valleys like a coded heartbeat. Maybe messages of grain deliveries, maybe warnings of invasion, or maybe, because you like to think humans always make time for the absurd, just gossip traveling at light speed, Cusco has new potatoes. Tell everyone. The path winds through a gorge, narrow enough that the walls close in like bookends. Moss drips from every crevice, and water seeps through seams in the stone, tracing tiny rivers that have run the same course for centuries. You catch the faint scent of something mineral and old, like rusted coins. The line of the road remains arrow straight even here. The masons carved the mountainside itself to obey geometry. You run your fingers over the cut edge and feel the grain of the rock, still smooth where their chisels kissed it. A small shrine sits ahead, carved directly into the cliff face, just a shallow alcove with a few pebbles arranged inside. Your guide murmurs, "For Pachamama, Mother Earth." You leave a coin, not historically accurate, sure, but close enough, and keep walking. The Incas believed roads were living veins, and offerings kept them alive. It's hard not to think of how the line, this relentless straightness, mirrors the Inca worldview. They saw their empire as a web of energy, sex they called them, sacred pathways radiating from Cusco like sunbeams. Each line connected shrines, springs, and stones to cosmic forces. Geometry wasn't just for building, it was a map of meaning. Historians still argue whether the sex system was political control disguised as spirituality or spirituality disguised as urban planning. Either way, it worked. The empire moved not just on feet and grain but on faith in the order of lines. You come to a suspension bridge, A narrow span of woven grass ropes stretched across a chasm that drops away into cloud. Your pulse spikes as the bridge creaks under your weight. Below, white water boils, the sound both thrilling and profoundly rude. But the ropes hold. They always have. Inca engineers rebuilt these bridges annually, a communal ritual blending engineering and devotion. You can almost hear the laughter of villagers as they sang and knotted fibers together, celebrating the exactness of a tradition that defied chaos itself. Halfway across, you look down and see the world dissolve into fog. The bridge sways slightly, and you laugh nervously. Who needs bungee cords when you've got historical infrastructure? You mutter. Somewhere, an unseen bird answers with a shriek that sounds suspiciously judgmental. When you reach the other side, the road cuts upward again, perfectly graded, every curve calculated for drainage and traction. The jungle thins, revealing terraces climbing the slope like a staircase for giants. The Incas carved entire hills into agricultural harmony, geometry feeding empire. A fringe theory floats through your mind, that the Inca engineers might have used a form of acoustic surveying, whistling to hear echoes bounce off distant cliffs to gauge alignment. No solid proof, of course, but you can imagine it, a line drawn by sound, by song. You whistle experimentally. The echo returns a beat later, warped but recognizable. You grin. Science or superstition, whatever works. The air cools as you climb, and when you finally crest the ridge, the world opens in layers of light. You can see miles of terraces, each one a perfect curve approximating a straight line when viewed from above. The illusion of order in a landscape that constantly shifts. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful, the fight to keep straight lines alive in a crooked world. You stop at a rest hut, the stones still warm from the day. Your guide pours you chicha, fermented corn beer, and it tastes faintly like sweet dust and survival. You sip, feeling your heartbeat slow. The road hums below you, unseen but undeniable. It stretches onward, cutting across mountains, deserts, and time itself. And somewhere, far ahead, you can almost see the empire breathing again, each line pulsing like a living thing. The next morning dawns like a painting, mist pooled in the valleys, light spilling from behind the mountains as if the sun's been politely waiting for its cue. You stretch, your bones still arguing with yesterday's climb, and step onto the terrace edge. Below you, the lines of the fields glow golden green in early light, each one drawn with mathematical serenity. You're not looking at random agriculture, you're standing in the Inca laboratory of Mari, one of the strangest feats of engineering in the ancient world. It doesn't look like much at first, just a series of concentric circles carved into a high plane. But as you descend, you realize it's a bowl-shaped amphitheater of terraces, each ring lower and warmer than the last. The temperature difference from top to bottom can reach nearly 15 degrees Celsius. The Incas built this to experiment with crops. Imagine a pre-Columbian climate simulator made of dirt and sunlight. You almost expect someone in a poncho to hand you a clipboard. You wander the curved steps slowly, the air thick with the smell of wet soil and grass. Somewhere between the second and third ring, you feel it, the geometry of purpose. Every line here curves with precision, yet the design still flows like water. The Incas weren't just building for utility, they were sculpting the earth's skin into something harmonious. Historians still argue whether Mari was purely agricultural or also ceremonial. Some claim it was a research center, a sort of green think tank. Others believe it doubled as a sacred site where the empire's engineers worshipped the forces that made their precision possible. Either way, the effect is hypnotic. You stand at the center of the lowest terrace, close your eyes, and the circular walls around you seem to hum faintly, as if you've stepped inside the empire's pulse. A bee drifts by, lazy in the heat, and you watch it trace an accidental figure eight between the levels. You laugh softly. Even the bees respect symmetry. The air tastes faintly metallic, fertilizer, minerals, the ghosts of experiments long done. You crouch to touch the earth, and it's soft and rich, as though centuries of patient hands have kept it alive. Your guide reappears, chewing on a coca leaf, and gestures with a grin. They tested corn here, he says. Also potatoes, peppers, even coca. Different climates for different altitudes. You nod, imagining Inca agronomists in woven tunics, checking rows of seedlings with the same intensity NASA engineers check rocket telemetry. They were trying to control chaos, one seed at a time. From above, Murray must have looked like a green mandala, a meditation drawn into the ground. And it wasn't just beauty for beauty's sake. The Inca Empire spanned every biome imaginable: desert, jungle, high alpine. They needed crops that could thrive anywhere, and so they built laboratories of light and temperature, testing until they found perfection. You walk back up the terraces, and with every step, the air cools slightly. It's like walking through layers of time, warm valleys of invention giving way to chill observation decks of hindsight. The stones here fit together with the same seamless precision as the walls of Cusco. Water channels cut along the terraces still carry runoff perfectly, even centuries later. The sound of it, a faint trickle, rhythmic, makes you sleepy in the best way. You pause halfway up and glance toward the horizon. The Andes stretch endless, like folded paper, and thin trails wind away toward villages you can't see. Somewhere in that distance lies Machu Picchu, still hidden by cloud, still waiting. But first, you breathe in this engineered calm. There's a fringe theory you can't help recalling, that Murray was also used as an acoustic instrument, that certain chants or flutes played from the center would echo in spiraling waves, perfectly aligned with the terraces. You clap once, experimentally, and the sound blooms outward in rings before fading. The geometry answers you back. You grin. Nice reverb. The wind shifts, and you catch a new scent, something faintly sweet and dusty. Flowers blooming between stones. You remember that the Incas saw engineering and nature not as opposites but as dance partners. Every terrace, aqueduct, and canal was built to work with the landscape's rhythm, not against it. Maybe that's why their lines still hold. They didn't force straightness, they persuaded it. As you reach the top again, the view widens, terraces like green ripples, sky the color of burnished steel. You sit on a low stone wall, the warmth seeping into your palms, and let your mind drift. These concentric lines feel almost hypnotic, like staring at a fingerprint the size of a hill. A reminder that order can be gentle. Historians still argue whether the perfection here was born of divine instruction or simply good observation. Did the gods whisper geometry into their ears, or did they just watch how the world worked and copy it? You'd argue it doesn't matter. The result speaks for itself, a living diagram of curiosity and care. You sip water, and the world hums quietly around you. The distant bleat of a sheep echoes through the amphitheater, distorted into something almost musical. A condor circles above, its shadow briefly slicing across the terraces, turning each curve into a clock's ticking face. And then, for a fleeting second, you imagine the place full of life again. Workers tending plants, children running between rows, priests watching from the edges, murmuring about the will of the sun. The sound of laughter, of tools, of faith in precision. You smile. Straight lines, curved minds. That's what they were, artists of alignment, lovers of control but not rigidity. You stretch your legs, glance once more at the perfect bowl below, and whisper, "You built harmony into doubt." The sun climbs higher, bleaching the terraces into brightness. The air turns warm enough that you can feel sweat forming on your back again. The experiment, centuries old, still works, Its geometry still balances light and shade, warmth and cool, the precise conversation between heaven and soil. You shoulder your pack and start walking toward the next rise. The straight road waits where the terraces end, a promise of more mysteries ahead. Behind you, Murray glows quietly in the sun, an ancient equation that still hasn't finished solving itself. By the time you reach the next valley, the air feels heavier, as if the world itself has grown thoughtful. You follow the stone path downward, tracing another perfect line carved through impossible terrain, until the mountains suddenly open into a sweeping basin of light. There, on the ridge opposite, a fortress rises like a frozen thunderclap, terraces cascading in deliberate precision, walls gleaming gold in the sun. You've arrived at Ollantaytambo, the Inca stronghold that turned geometry into defense. At first glance, it's beautiful. A few minutes later, you realize it's terrifying. Every wall, every stairway, every grain silo has been positioned not just for symmetry but for survival. You can almost hear the silent argument between beauty and brutality playing out in the stone. The Incas built Ollantaytambo as both temple and military base, and they did it with an engineer's sense of poetry. You climb the terraces slowly, calves burning. Each step is perfectly measured, no more, no less, because when you're defending an empire, even your stays have to be strategic. The blocks are enormous again, shaped like sleeping giants, locked so tightly you could run a fingernail along the seams and find nothing but air. You drag your fingers across one join and murmur, "You people had trust issues with chaos." Historians still argue whether Ollantaytambo began as a royal estate or was always intended as a fortress. What's certain is that the site's alignment wasn't random. Its walls mirror the surrounding mountains, forming geometric relationships that hint at sacred math. At sunrise, the shadows of peaks fall exactly along the main stairway, a reminder that even light obeyed the engineer's calculations. You reach the Temple of the Sun, where 6 pink granite monoliths stand like a lineup of quiet gods. Each weighs more than 50 tons, hauled here from a quarry miles away across the river. You imagine ropes, ramps, and human grit, but still, no wheels, no iron. The stones bear faint carvings, snakes, steps, concentric circles. You touch the surface and feel a strange warmth, as if the sun itself has been living inside them. Your guide, ever the minimalist philosopher, gestures toward the walls. "Earthquakes tried," he says simply, "but they never won." He's right. When the Spanish came, they found the Inca walls unbreakable. They built their own houses on top, which promptly collapsed during tremors, while the old foundations remained smugly intact. A gust of wind sweeps up from the valley, carrying the scent of maize and something sharper, like the ghosts of campfires. You turn, and from this height, the view takes your breath. The road snakes below, straight as a ruler, and far beyond it, the Urubamba River flashes like a blade. Somewhere near the riverbanks, archaeologists once discovered remnants of a massive ramp, proof of the quarry transport system. The sheer logistics still baffle modern engineers. Some whisper about water-lubricated slides, others about rope networks so advanced they resembled cranes. Historians still argue whether the secret was lost to time or simply never written down. You move along the upper terrace, and there's a moment when the sun hits the granite so precisely that the surface glows like fire. The Incas timed that too. These walls double as astronomical markers, predicting solstices with uncanny accuracy. You shield your eyes and grin. You even weaponized sunlight. Overachievers. Halfway down the slope, a cluster of trapezoidal doorways waits in perfect formation. The Inca loved this shape, wider at the bottom, narrower at the top, because it absorbed seismic shock and looked sleek doing it. You duck through one, stepping into cool shadow, and find yourself surrounded by the quiet weight of genius. Even the air feels squared. You notice something odd carved into the rock near the floor, a faint grid pattern, lines etched carefully as if testing spacing. Maybe a mason's practice mark, or maybe an ancient surveyor's sketch. Either way, it's humbling to think their drafts were made in stone. Outside, laughter echoes faintly, locals calling to each other across terraces. Life still clings to the fortress. A few women sell woven bracelets near the entrance, their tables shaded by bright umbrellas. You buy one, the colors vivid against the gray stone, red for the sun, blue for the river, black for Pachamama. She ties it to your wrist and smiles knowingly, as if she can tell you've fallen under the old spell of straight lines. You wander toward the Inca granaries, high stone storehouses perched on a cliff opposite the fortress. The location isn't random, it's positioned perfectly to catch cool winds, preserving grain without rot. You stand there, realizing how every structure, even one meant to store corn, was designed like a diagram from a divine textbook. Straight lines, sharp angles, intelligent placement. Efficiency as art. A fringe theory crosses your mind, the kind whispered about over beers at archaeology conferences, that the Incas used the fortress as a giant tuning fork. The way the terraces, walls, and surrounding cliffs form acoustic channels could amplify sound across the valley. You test it, calling out a simple "hey." The echo returns seconds later, slightly warped, as if the mountains themselves have joined the conversation. You grin. Confirmed, ancient surround sound. The sun dips lower, painting the valley in honey and bronze. You descend the terraces again, watching shadows stretch in long, deliberate stripes. Down here, the symmetry feels intimate, less about control, more about connection. The stones hum faintly under your feet, the same way Murray's terraces did. The Inca sense of geometry was alive. It wasn't lines on a map, but veins through which belief and power flowed. As twilight settles, you look up at the fortress once more. It's easy to imagine guards pacing those upper walls centuries ago, silhouettes framed against the fire-orange sky, eyes scanning the straight roads for the shimmer of enemy armor. The Spanish once tried to storm Ollantaytambo and failed, driven back by stone walls and clever irrigation floods. The Incas turned precision into strategy, geometry as survival. You exhale slowly, letting the last light fade. The fortress, half in shadow now, looks softer, almost sleepy. Its edges blur into the mountain behind it, and you realize that was the point all along. The Inca didn't fight nature. They merged with it so seamlessly that even time itself struggles to tell where one ends and the other begins. Somewhere in the gathering dark, a flute begins to play, high, mournful, patient. The sound carries across the valley, finding the lines between terraces and bouncing back. You sit down on a low wall, wrist still bright with its new thread, and close your eyes. The fortress breathes with you, steady and measured. The Inca engineers who loved straight lines didn't just build walls, they built ways of thinking. And even now, long after the chisels have gone silent, the angles remain exact, the message unbroken. The next morning finds you trudging through a corridor of fog, the kind that clings to your hair and condenses into small droplets on your jacket. The world feels suspended between night and day, neither one claiming dominance. You follow a narrow path carved along a mountainside, the sheer drop to your left hidden behind mist, and the distant sound of water rushing somewhere below. You realize this is the kind of place where straight lines are not just preferred, they are mandatory. Every misstep could be a very long tumble. You probably won't survive this, you think wryly, but the path insists on order, and you obey. Ahead, the landscape opens into the ancient city of Machu Picchu, perched impossibly on a ridge like a jewel in a crown of green. Even now, centuries later, it feels almost alive, as if the mountains themselves have grown these terraces, and the Incas merely polished the edges. You pause to catch your breath, looking at the stairways, plazas, and walls, all aligned in a manner that betrays obsessive planning. Straight lines radiate everywhere, yet the city curves gracefully along the contours of the ridge. Tonight we are tracing the engineering genius that allowed this city to exist, and the more you look, the more you realize the straight lines weren't just aesthetic, they were survival. Rainwater channels zigzag neatly through terraces, ensuring erosion never claims the stone. The walls are trapezoidal, able to withstand earthquakes that would crumble modern buildings. The Incas didn't just carve stone, they coaxed it into obedience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start wandering along the central plaza, feeling the gentle slope beneath your feet, noticing how every building, from the Temple of the Sun to the Watchman's Hut, follows a geometry that seems dictated by the cosmos. Historians still argue whether Machu Picchu was a royal estate, a religious center, or a combination of both. The truth is probably somewhere in between, with straight lines and precise angles acting as the language that unified all its purposes. You reach the Intihuatana stone, the famed hitching post of the sun. It sits precisely where a priest or astronomer could track the solstice by watching the shadow it casts. Standing there, you feel a strange vertigo. The earth, the sky, and human ingenuity coalescing in one perfectly engineered knot. The stone is cold and surprisingly smooth under your fingers. You imagine priests aligning the shadow with their calculations, whispering prayers that were part math, part faith. A few steps away, the urban sectors of Machu Picchu reveal another layer of planning. Storage rooms, residential buildings, and ceremonial plazas, all connected by roads and stairways laid out in impeccable straight lines. The terraces are built not just for cultivation but to stabilize the mountain itself. The Incas understood stress and load distribution intuitively. You almost expect a modern structural engineer to appear, jaw dropped, checking their notes. As you wander higher, the mist begins to lift. The slopes below reveal rivers, forests, and neighboring peaks, each aligned with Machu Picchu's geometry in ways that suggest intentional celestial mapping. French historians have proposed the entire city is an enormous astronomical observatory, but no one agrees on which stars were meant to be tracked. Still, the precision is undeniable. Stairways line up, buildings face exact angles, and natural terraces become built terraces without missing a beat. The air is thick with the smell of moss and stone. You pause near a water channel running alongside a terrace. The channel curves with deliberate grace, designed to carry rainwater efficiently without eroding the structure. You dip your hand in, and the water is crisp and cold. You imagine how engineers centuries ago would have celebrated small victories like these, a tiny stream running just as planned. Historians still argue whether the city was ever fully completed or intentionally left unfinished, but the level of precision already achieved is breathtaking. Even the stone blocks are irregularly shaped to fit together like an interlocking puzzle, absorbing seismic shocks effortlessly. You run your fingers along the smooth edges and marvel at how the builders achieved such perfection without mortar, measuring tools, or electricity. A condor circles high above, casting a moving shadow across the terraces. Its flight is elegant, almost as if it knows the geometry beneath it. You smile. The straight lines and perfect angles of the city seem to guide the natural world as much as the other way around. By the time you reach the top of the agricultural terraces, the sun is high, illuminating every ridge, stairway, and wall in vivid detail. You feel the precision of centuries of planning settle into your mind, a quiet admiration for a civilization that loved straight lines more than convenience or comfort. They measured the earth, the stars, and themselves, all at once. And in that light, Machu Picchu hums, not with ghosts or spirits, but with calculation, care, and a kind of eternal patience that still speaks louder than any words could. You descend the terraces slowly, letting your gaze drift along the straight aqueducts and channels that lace the mountainside. Water flows silently, obedient, tracing lines that echo the precision of every stone wall. The Incas knew the power of straight lines not just in roads or walls, but in liquid. Every drop of water that trickled through Machu Picchu's channels was calculated to feed crops, prevent erosion, and maintain balance in an ecosystem where chaos could arrive in the form of a single cloudburst. You pause at a junction where two terraces meet at a sharp angle. Your fingers trace the seam, feeling the faint undulation of stone carved to accommodate the mountain's natural curve. Historians still argue whether such meticulous adjustment was purely practical, or if there was a spiritual element. Perhaps aligning the terrace with nearby peaks was also a form of devotion. You lean back and picture the engineers centuries ago, measuring shadows with ropes and pebbles, singing or chanting to mark the passing hours. A small herd of llamas grazes nearby, their noses to the ground, oblivious to the grand design around them. You chuckle, noting that even the animals seem to honor the geometry. They move in careful arcs between terraces, never stepping where the engineers didn't intend. French historians suggest that llamas were selected not just for wool and meat, but because their movement patterns reinforced the terrace integrity. You shake your head at the idea, smiling. Maybe, maybe not. As you move along the main path, your boots crunching softly against gravel, you notice an almost invisible series of carved steps leading to a secluded observation point. You follow them, imagining the Inca priests or engineers who once stood here, arms raised, watching clouds and stars, calculating seasons, plotting harvests. The air is thick with mist, and you almost feel as though the mountains themselves are listening. You reach the top, where the path opens into a small plaza, perfectly rectangular, framed by trapezoidal buildings. The angles are precise, a harmony of mathematics and intuition. Your mind wanders to the Inca concept of sex, sacred lines radiating from Cusco that connected temples, shrines, and key landmarks across the empire. Machu Picchu is like a microcosm of that system, a city built along invisible strings connecting heaven, earth, and human activity. You crouch beside a small stone niche and run your hand over its smooth surface. Some scholars argue that niches were purely functional, for storage or offerings. Others suggest they were carefully calculated focal points for meditation or ritual, aligned with distant peaks or astronomical events. You shrug. Either way, it's working. Your own mind feels ordered just looking at it, a tiny internal alignment orchestrated by centuries-old stone. A faint whistle of wind carries the smell of wild orchids and wet moss. You close your eyes, and in the silence, you begin to feel the rhythm of the city, the subtle vibration of water channels, the slope of terraces, the slight inclines of stairways. Every straight line, every angle is a note in a quiet symphony of design. You step toward the Temple of the Three Windows, where sunlight spills through openings carved in precise alignment with distant peaks. It's a subtle but breathtaking effect. The sun touches the stone in exactly the same way only a few days each year, illuminating floors and walls that otherwise remain in shadow. Historians still argue about which astronomical events were prioritized and which were accidental. Either way, the light shows you how far these engineers were willing to take perfection. A cloud drifts past, softening the sun. Shadows stretch, realigning the terraces, changing the angles of light across the plaza. You realize the city is not static, it's a living geometry, interacting with time, climate, and movement. The Incas created lines that survived centuries, yet allowed them to bend just enough to accommodate nature. You wander further down the paths connecting the residential sector. Each house is trapezoidal, compact, designed to resist earthquakes. Every doorway, every wall, fits with the others, forming a grid that is both simple and astonishingly complex. You notice faint scratches in the stone, practice marks or perhaps ancient planning guides. Someone, centuries ago, touched this rock to ensure that perfection would remain. A soft cry of a bird echoes across the valley, broken by the faint trickle of water. You pause, taking it all in, the straight lines of walls, terraces, and channels, the gentle curve of the mountain, the precision of construction, the flow of nature around it. It's a lesson in control without domination, in order without rigidity. You sit on a low terrace wall and stretch your legs, feeling the sun warm your back. Straight lines, curves, water, and stone, they all hum together in a rhythm that is both architectural and spiritual. And you realize that what you're witnessing is not just engineering, it's a philosophy, a conversation between humans, the land, and the sky, conducted in the language of geometry. As the afternoon light softens, you wander toward the northwest corner of Machu Picchu, where the terraces slope steeply into the cloud-draped valley below. The mist rolls over the ridges like a soft blanket, muffling sound and stretching shadows. Here, the straight lines of terraces and walls seem almost unreal, slicing the green mountains like the world's most meticulous origami. You realize that geometry wasn't just a tool for the Inca. It was their language, a way to speak with mountains, sun, and rain all at once. You come to a small stone stairway winding up toward a high terrace. The steps are perfect trapezoids, each one subtly angled to absorb seismic shocks. You pause midway, feeling the smooth edges beneath your palm, and can almost sense the countless hands that carved each one. Fringe theories suggest that some terraces were aligned with constellations, turning every step into a terrestrial map of the stars. Historians still argue whether this alignment was symbolic, practical, or both. But standing here, you feel the intent as clearly as the sun's warmth on your neck. A faint sound carries from the valley, rushing water from a hidden stream. The engineers designed Machu Picchu's aqueducts to carry rain and spring water seamlessly, running through channels that never eroded despite centuries of use. You crouch beside one of the channels, dipping your hand into the icy stream. It's alive, moving exactly as intended, a reminder that the Inca's obsession with straight lines extended even to fluid. Every curve and tone calculated, every gradient precise. You walk along a high terrace to the royal sector, where trapezoidal niches, polished stones, and windows align with distant peaks. The sun gate, barely visible through morning mist now touched with gold, frames the mountains perfectly. As you step closer, you feel the geometry's pull. Even the smallest stones here were meticulously shaped, adjusted to fit without mortar, interlocking like a puzzle whose solution had been known for centuries. Historians still argue whether Machu Picchu was abandoned suddenly or gradually, but the precision of its construction suggests long-term planning. Every line, every wall, every terrace is built with redundancy and foresight. You can see how water is directed across multiple channels, terraces are staggered for both sunlight and safety, and stairways connect sectors with unerring logic. The city was designed to survive, both in structure and in human use. You pause to watch a pair of condors circling overhead. Their wings trace arcs that mimic the terraces below, shadows sliding across the walls like living geometry. You think of the Inca priests who might have observed these birds, interpreting their flight as messages or signs. Straight lines in stone, and curves in the sky, a balance between control and interpretation. Nearby, a small platform rises like a stage. From here, the entire city unfolds, terraces, plazas, aqueducts, and stairways all aligning with peaks and ridges beyond. You feel dizzy from the perfection, the almost obsessive calculation that underlies every corner. The planners accounted for rainfall, sunlight, wind, and the subtle shifts of the mountains. The city breathes with a rhythm dictated by geometry and necessity. You crouch to examine a stone, noticing a faint groove. Perhaps a mason's mark, perhaps a survey guide. Either way, it connects you across centuries to someone who, like you, stood here and checked their lines. It's humbling to realize that every straight path you walk, every wall you touch, was tested and perfected, often by hand, often by intuition, often by devotion. The wind shifts, bringing the scent of orchids and wet earth. You close your eyes and let the terrace absorb your presence, the precise lines of the city pressing into your consciousness. Straight lines in an imperfect world, carefully measured yet alive. This is the philosophy you're beginning to understand. A small, playful thought surfaces. Even after all this time, even with all the scholarly debates and fringe theories, the Incas have left a city that quietly teaches patience, precision, and the subtle power of straight lines. And standing here, you can't help but feel grateful for the clarity it brings. You rise, brushing dust from your hands, and follow a path leading upward toward the guardhouse terrace, ready to see how Machu Picchu's geometry merges with the clouds above. You climb toward the guardhouse terrace, and with each step, the city unfolds beneath you like a map etched into the mountains. The terraces, stairways, and trapezoidal structures stretch in precise, orderly lines that seem impossible given the rugged terrain. Mist rolls in from the valley below, brushing your face with cool fingers, and you realize that from this vantage, the straight lines of Machu Picchu are not just construction, they are choreography, guiding the eye, directing the body, and orchestrating movement through space. The sun gate, faintly visible through the fog, aligns perfectly with the main ridge and the rising sun at the solstice. You imagine priests, standing here centuries ago, tracing shadows on stone, whispering prayers, and recording the heavens in a language of straight lines and angles. Historians still argue whether these observations were purely ritualistic, functional for agriculture, or a combination of both. You shrug, realizing that sometimes the mystery is part of the charm. From the terrace, you notice something fascinating: the city's water system. Channels carved from stone run along the edges of terraces, bending and curving with subtle grace. Even the most minor gradients were calculated to maintain flow without erosion. The water doesn't just travel, it sings. You crouch beside a channel and let the cold stream run through your fingers. You can imagine a priest or engineer centuries ago doing exactly the same thing, ensuring that every line was perfect, every drop obeyed its course. Fringe theories suggest that some channels were even tuned acoustically, creating specific resonances when water ran through them, a kind of natural organ built from stone. You laugh softly. Music and math, ancient addition. The terraces themselves are astonishing. From your elevated view, the layers of agricultural plots descend like a green staircase, each one slightly angled, precisely leveled, and aligned with the contours of the mountainside. These aren't just functional, they're engineering statements, each straight line a testament to the Incas' intimate knowledge of topography. They understood load distribution, erosion control, and microclimates long before modern science had names for them. You wander down the main plaza, noticing trapezoidal doors and niches. The trapezoidal shape isn't just aesthetic, it stabilizes walls in an earthquake-prone zone. The precision of alignment here is astounding. Doors are perpendicular to floors, walls are interlocked like giant puzzles, and stones are polished to near perfection. Historians still argue about the methods the Incas used to move and shape these massive blocks, but you suspect it was a mix of ingenuity, brute strength, and observation of natural forces. A condor glides silently above, wings casting long shadows across terraces and temples. You can almost imagine the bird as a messenger, tracing the same geometry that shaped human structures below. Straight lines and curved wings, earth and sky connected through design and instinct. You feel dizzy with admiration, and perhaps just a little jealous. Your attention drifts to a small shrine tucked into the corner of a terrace. It's simple but deliberate, stones arranged in perfect symmetry. You realize that nearly every corner of Machu Picchu carries this duality, functional yet ceremonial, practical yet sacred. Straight lines guide both feet and spirit. The Incas understood that control over space could reflect control over time, ritual, and memory. You sit on the terrace's edge, overlooking the city, and the valley, and the cloud-shrouded mountains beyond. There's a strange peace here, a rhythm to the straight lines and precise angles that seems to whisper, order can exist in chaos. Even the way clouds hug the terraces seems planned, though you know better. It's nature improvising within the lines the Incas drew. You take a deep breath, inhaling mist, stone, and centuries of ingenuity, and feel the city settle into you. Machu Picchu isn't just stone and earth, it's a conversation between human ambition, geometry, and the mountain itself. And as the wind drifts softly past your ears, you realize that straight lines aren't just a tool, they are philosophy, a way of bending the world to clarity without breaking its soul. The sun dips lower as you leave Machu Picchu behind, the terraces and temples fading into mist, and you follow a descending path toward a smaller valley. The light here is softer, golden, dusting every stone with warmth, and your legs ache pleasantly from hours of climbing. You can feel the memory of straight lines lingering in your mind, tracing invisible grids across your thoughts, guiding your steps even as the terrain grows uneven. Your path leads you to Qhapaq, a site often overshadowed by Machu Picchu but no less astonishing. Here, the Inca engineers devoted themselves to water and precision. Terraces cascade in sweeping arcs, channels carry streams along impossibly smooth courses, and fountains emerge from walls with a gentle, predictable flow. You bend to dip a hand into one of the channels. The water is cold, swift, and perfectly aligned with the terraces, whispering secrets of centuries-old engineering. Fringe theories claim some of these channels were designed for ritual cleansing, their geometry enhancing the spiritual resonance of flowing water. Historians still argue whether these sites were purely utilitarian, sacred, or a hybrid of both, but the lines themselves leave no room for doubt about the engineer's skill. You wander along a steep terrace, noticing the interlocking stone walls designed to resist earthquakes. The trapezoidal shapes recur here as they did at Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu, demonstrating the Incas' consistent application of geometric wisdom. You run a hand along the smooth surface of a wall, marveling at how these stones, some massive and irregularly shaped, fit together so flawlessly that you can't slide a blade between them. This is craftsmanship honed over generations, a dialogue between human effort and natural stone. A gust of wind carries the scent of fertile soil and highland flowers. You pause to take it in, imagining the terraces alive with crops centuries ago, workers moving methodically, each step following precise lines in the earth. The Incas seemed to understand that straight lines could impose order not just on structures but on labor and life itself. The terraces here were experiments in control, microclimates, water distribution, and slope stability all balanced through observation and intuition. You climb to the topmost terrace, where a series of fountains spill water in straight, deliberate streams into channels below. It's mesmerizing, an engineering ballet in miniature. You kneel to watch the flow, noticing how every drop follows a perfectly calculated path. The Incas, in essence, choreographed water, shaping it as they shaped stone. You laugh softly at the absurdity. Modern city engineers would kill for a fraction of this control over urban runoff. Historians still argue whether Qhapaq's terraces were primarily ceremonial, agricultural, or demonstration spaces, but standing here, you feel the answer in your bones. The straight lines are both practical and spiritual, teaching patience, order, and respect for the forces that govern the earth. The Incas weren't just builders, they were orchestrators of harmony. You wander toward a secluded vantage point, where terraces seem to float above the valley, and the rivers below cut across the land in irregular, chaotic beauty. And yet, the Inca constructions hold, perfect, deliberate, serene. Straight lines slicing through mountains, water bending to human intention, stone resisting centuries of erosion. You can't help but marvel at the audacity and precision, and at how the same principles repeated across valleys, peaks, and cities form an unbroken thread of understanding. A condor drifts overhead, its shadow crossing terraces, fountains, and channels. The straight lines of human ingenuity meet the curves of natural flight. You grin. The Incas designed for eternity, and even nature seems to recognize their patience. As the sun sets behind distant peaks, painting the valley gold and pink, you feel the calm logic of straight lines settling over your consciousness. Every terrace, channel, and wall is a testament to a philosophy that values clarity, order, and subtle power. The engineers of Taipan, like their cousins at Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo, didn't just build, they orchestrated a world in miniature, where lines guided water, labor, faith, and thought itself. You sit on a terrace edge, tracing invisible grids across the valley with your eyes, letting the precision of centuries sink into your mind. Straight lines in a crooked world, they endure, and in their endurance, they whisper the quiet brilliance of human ingenuity. The final climb of the day takes you to a high ridge overlooking a broad valley, where the remnants of Inca terraces stretch toward the horizon in a patchwork of straight lines and gentle curves. The air is thinner here, scented with pine and dust, and the wind tugs at your jacket like it's eager to share secrets. You stop, letting your gaze travel along terraces, channels, and stone walls that converge in precise angles, a geometric dance orchestrated centuries ago. It feels like stepping into a living blueprint, where every line matters, every slope has meaning, and every stone carries history. You remember the first lines you followed in the Nazca Desert, miles of geoglyphs etched into sand, and you realize that what unites these distant places is more than technique. It's philosophy, the obsession with order, with straightness, with control channeled into harmony. The Incas, and the cultures that preceded them, weren't simply building for survival. They were building for understanding, for a vision of the world aligned to their gods, their stars, and the rhythms of nature. Historians still argue whether the straight lines were symbolic, ritualistic, or purely practical, but their power is indisputable. You wander along a narrow terrace, noticing subtle shifts in stonework, slight variations that reveal the hands of individual masons. Some blocks are polished, others are roughly hewn, yet all fit together with astonishing precision. Fringe theories claim that advanced surveying tools, lost to time, enabled these alignments, but you prefer to believe in human patience and ingenuity. There is a rawness here, a tactile connection between mind, hand, and stone that no technology could replicate. Ahead, a channel carries water down the slope, gurgling gently. You follow its course, watching it wind around terraces, descend gradually, and feed distant crops in a rhythm that's both practical and hypnotic. The straightness of the aqueducts contrasts with the unpredictable curves of the valley, a dialogue between human intention and natural flow. You can almost hear the engineers' laughter as they tested each gradient, perfected each angle, coaxing the water into obedience. The ridge narrows, leading to a viewpoint where the valley unfolds below like a tapestry. You notice the shadows of terraces stretching in straight lines, mirroring the mountains beyond. You recall the story of a Spanish chronicler who, upon seeing Machu Picchu decades later, marveled at its perfect alignment and declared that no European city could rival such ingenuity. You smile, imagining that even centuries later, travelers would stop here, awed by the same harmony that now fills your senses. A condor drifts overhead, circling and then vanishing into the mist. You feel a kinship with the bird, both tracing arcs across a world meticulously designed, both part of a geometry that is greater than any single life. You realize the Incas built not for themselves but for time, for the earth, and for the sky. Every straight line, every terrace, every aqueduct is a conversation across centuries. As you sit at the ridge's edge, watching the light fade into gold and violet, the precision of the empire's lines feels like a quiet embrace. They speak of control tempered by patience, order tempered by respect, human ambition tempered by reverence for nature. Even the angles of shadows and the curves of clouds seem guided by the same principles, reminding you that perfection isn't a destination, it's a practice. You trace your gaze along terraces and channels until they blur into distance, letting your mind float with the geometry of thought itself. Straight lines, measured steps, flowing water, interlocking stone, they all converge into one truth. The Inca engineers who loved straight lines were not merely builders. They were poets, philosophers, and dreamers, carving permanence into mountains, feeding the empire, and whispering across time. And in this fading light, you feel a gentle peace. The mountains, the terraces, the channels, they all breathe in quiet agreement, and you, a fleeting observer, are allowed to witness the enduring brilliance of human intention drawn straight into the world. You sink onto a terrace edge as twilight drapes the valley in muted gold and deepening violet. The air feels softer now, almost tactile, like the mountains themselves are exhaling. You let your body relax, allowing the ache in your legs and the warmth of the sun-soaked stones to lull you into quiet contemplation. The straight lines of terraces, walls, and channels no longer command your attention. They simply exist, harmonizing with the curves of the mountains, the flow of water, and the drifting clouds. The precision that once seemed rigid now feels gentle, patient, almost meditative. You close your eyes and imagine the hands that carved each stone, shaped each terrace, and guided each drop of water. They moved deliberately, as if time itself was a partner in their work. These were people who understood that every line drawn across earth or stone could echo for centuries, shaping not just the land but thought, labor, and ritual. You picture the sun rising over a ridge, casting sharp, calculating shadows across the terraces, the engineers checking alignment, whispering prayers, laughing at small successes, singing songs that carried with the wind. The sound of trickling water from nearby channels reaches you, rhythmic and soothing, a reminder that the Inca obsession with straight lines extended even to the life of rivers. Water bends to necessity, yes, but also to beauty. Every tone, slope, and gradient considered, every ripple calculated. You feel the harmony of utility and art as the valley exhales around you. Historians still debate many aspects of these feats, the spiritual versus the practical, the symbolic versus the functional. But as you breathe in the scent of moss, wet stone, and highland flowers, the argument feels less important. What matters is the quiet testimony of the land itself, that care, intention, and patience endure. Straight lines etched into earth can carry meaning, survival, and wonder through centuries. You watch the last light fade over the ridges, the shadows stretching like ink across the terraces. The mountains soften, the channels whisper, the condors vanish into the mist. The geometry you've traced today, from Nazca to Machu Picchu, from aqueducts to fortresses, settles inside you like a gentle rhythm. Straight lines are no longer just angles. They are a lesson in clarity, resilience, and harmony. And as darkness creeps softly over the valley, you feel your mind slow, your heartbeat sync with the pulse of the terraces. The world, once precise and ordered, now hums quietly beneath a blanket of stars. You inhale deeply, let the tranquility seep into your bones, and whisper a final thought of gratitude. for the engineers, the mountains, and the enduring poetry of straight lines. Sleep now, carried by terraces and aqueducts, guided by geometry, and cradled by mountains.